It's up! Nah, it won't bother. You know how it goes. Fake! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of In the Pale Moonlight, which is episode 19 of season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. This episode won my latest Patreon-only poll, which is those who support me on Patreon can vote in the poll, and that poll is actually a tie between two episodes, Clues, the Next Generation episode, and this episode, In the Pale Moonlight, Deep Space Nine episode, and as in all case of tiebreakers, ties in my polls, I'm the tiebreaker, and I decided to go with In the Pale Moonlight because this is an episode I've been wanting to review for a long time now, although I have talked about this in various other videos, my Deep Space Nine Season 6 review and my top 50 Deep Space Nine episode reviews, and I did a top 10 Deep Space Nine episode reviews a couple years ago. I also did like a top 10 Romulan, top 10 Cardassian. I don't know if it was in Cardassian, it was in the Romulan one. But anyway, I talked about this episode a lot in my channel, but I want to do a proper review. Top 25 Star Trek episodes of the entire franchise, that video too. But anyway, I want to do a proper review where I talk about this episode because it is one of my favorite episodes of the Star Trek franchise, and it's a fan favorite of the entire Star Trek franchise. I believe there was some convention in Las Vegas or something where the fans voted on which the top episodes and which were the worst episodes, and this episode made the top list, and I think it damn well should. I think it is highly recognized. On IMDb, it is tied for number 1 with Trials and Tribulations, but we know that Trials and Tribulations is just a bunch of people who don't even watch Deep Space Nine, just fans of the original series come on and just vote for that one episode because Kirk's in it. True Deep Space Nine fans voted for In the Pale Moonlight, and at least it got as high as that. But anyway, I was thinking about this more. I think this, in fact, is the perfect bottle episodes. Sometimes some people refer to Duet as the perfect bottle episode. I think I myself might have done so before because Duet is another one of my favorite episodes. I put Duet at number 1 and this at number 2 of the entire Star Trek franchise. People are like, oh, my number 2 is your number 2 is my number 1. I don't know why you had it. It's splitting hairs. They're both great. Doesn't matter which one's 1 or 2. They're both amazing. Anyway, but I think when I think about it, I think In the Pale Moonlight is more of the perfect bottle show because Duet has the guest star of Eamon Maritza, and the actor who plays him is amazing, and the episode's pretty much about him. It's all revolves around him. It has to do with Kira, but as far as his storyline goes, he draws Kira into his story, but it's basically his story. Whereas In the Pale Moonlight, it does have some guest actors. It has Mr. Senator Vreenak, who I love, and Graython Tolar, but it mainly just uses what it has. In fact, I think the whole situation and what happens in this episode is mind-blowing. It's really breaking barriers of what Trek has done before, and of course this has made a lot of people uncomfortable. I've heard that people didn't like this episode because it's controversial, because they thought it wouldn't have been Gene Roddenberry's vision, but I heard that's the case, but I've never actually seen any idiots, any people who had that opinion, which they're perfectly entitled to. Idiots! Excuse me, sorry. I don't know what that cough is, just ignore it. Anyway, but yeah, no, I haven't seen anyone with that particular opinion, but I've heard that some people had that opinion, and fair enough if they do, but yeah, but the thing is that this episode uses, it's such a natural conclusion, because this is it has characters like Garak, of course. It centers. He, I would say, is like the driving force of this episode. I think like Cisco obviously is the main character, much in the way that Kira is the main character of Duet, but much in the way that Duet is Eamon and Maritz's story, and he's the driving force. Garak is definitely the driving force of this episode, and this is so true to Garak's character that he would behave like this. And it's just like we just never got a specific episode like this where he was able to, like, we see him firsthand, like, do this whole, like, galaxy spanning plot to control the balance of power and, like, in the entire Alpha Quadrant. I mean, he's always capable of that. And if we hear stories about what he was doing as a Obsidian Order agent, and they basically did that. They did regime change. They were controlling the balance of power, but we just never saw it done on this level before. And more importantly, we never seen it done firsthand. We just heard stories about him doing in the past, and of course we've seen him do other plots before, like, you know, plant a bomb in his shop in order to get Odo to investigate a guy he thinks is on the station to assassinate him, and, you know, stuff like that. But we've never seen him manipulate our hero, Captain Sisko, and in order to affect the balance of power and in the whole galaxy. And Sisko at the end agrees with it, even though he was pissed off at first. He ultimately says that he wouldn't change a thing, and that he would still let Garak do what he did. And that's amazing. And I think, like, as I said, I think this is so true to Garak's character, so true to Sisko's character. We get moments like that moment with Quark, which is so true to his character. And it's like nothing in this episode is like a revelation or a character change. It's game changing. Don't get me wrong, and this is probably one of the most game changing episodes of the entire show, which is why I think it's so popular. But it's just so natural. Like, all the story that happens is just so natural to the characters that how they have been established. It's just like the stars had aligned in order to tell this, like, unique story. This is why I think this story is so goddamn brilliant. It's funny, though, that it originally started like as a script about Shakaar and, like, Jake investigating Shakaar, and then they rightfully realized nobody gives a fuck about Shakaar, so then they made it like they brought up the Garak and Sisko thing, but then it was originally supposed to be about Jake investigating them, and then they rightfully realized that nobody cares about Jake either. So we get this, which I think is a perfect it's like they looked at the characters that they have and how could they best utilize them. So that's why I say it's the perfect bottle show, because even though it does have a couple of guest stars, it mostly just takes place on the station, and mostly just involves dialogue. I don't think there's any action scenes in this. I mean, even Senator Vreenak's shuttle was just blown up. That happens off screen. We're just told about it. And there's a war that's going on, and ships are getting attacked, but we're just told about it. We don't see it. So this is a true bottle episode. But I love this episode for, episodes like this, like Duet. They're both my favorites of the show, and it's because I love being able to tell a story with just dialogue, with just having a bottle show, but being able to do more than what you could do in a special effects heavy or like fancy cinematography. Like, I very have the strong opinion, like, I know a lot of people who like the indie films that just rely on the fancy cinematography and hardly have any dialogue. For the most part, I mean, there's a few exceptions, there are always exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, I hate that. That just comes off as pretentious to me. To me, that's not as challenging. That's not as masterful. In order to create a story that, like, has you sucked in and engaged and blows your mind, is absolutely amazing, and using almost entirely dialogue, to me that is a hell of a lot more impressive than fancy schmancy cinematography or freaking, explosion special effects bullshit. That's just me. that's what I believe. I guess I'm more of a writer than a cinematographer, and at heart, I guess, and that's why I sort of lean that way. But this is the way the story is crafted and is able to use minimal, as I said, minimal special effects or minimal fancy schmancy cinematography, just plain simple in a room having conversations, and yet it is like one of the most engaging, suspenseful stories that I've ever seen, period. So it's very impressive that way. And as I said, like, they utilize like all the characters, like the scene with Dax Jadzia at the start. Like, first of all, the story is crafted beautifully as we go on the journey, because Sisko gets the moment where he's like, okay, I made a decision, I want the Romulans are going to join the war, because it starts with Dax telling the story about how someone she knew from the ship has gone missing, they assume it's destroyed. Sisko's like, oh, I'll look into it. She's like, don't bother, we all know what happened. The Dominion crossed through the Romulans' territory to destroy the ship, and the Romulans just let them do it. They turned a blind eye to it, and because they had to catch you up in case you missed a few episodes before, but the Romulans had a peace treaty with the Dominion, so that's why they don't care. And non-aggression treaty. And so Benjamin made the decision right then and there, Romulans are going to join the war. And so, as I said, we had the scene with him and Jadzia, where Jadzia pretending to be a Romulan. Like, that's using, a lot of people complain about Jadzia, and I will say she is underutilized a lot, but that's using her perfectly. Like, the actress actually did a really great job in that scene, like coming off as a Romulan and basically, proving to Sisko that the only way he was going to convince the Romulans is to show them proof that that's what they need. Of course, she probably could have just said that without the role playing, but it was good to get the role playing. That was a really good scene. Now, Romulan involvement, I also thought was brilliant. When I saw the preview for this episode, I was so excited to see it, because I was so excited they were focusing on the Romulans, because I think Deep Space Nine was probably the show that actually used the Romulans the best. And some people might find that weird because they barely use the Romulans, but that's the thing. They barely use the Romulans, and when they do, it was always amazing. They always earned it. Like, what's the other times we've seen the Romulans? A Visionary, which was a really amazing episode, and the Inter-Armin Emir Silent Legal, so however the fuck you say that, which was also a really great episode. So yeah, whenever they hardly do the Romulans, but whenever they do, they earn it. Oh, and the freaking Dias Cast and Improbable Calls is another time this Romulans is an amazing episode. So it's like they use them sparingly, but when they do, they really fucking earn it. And so I was excited. Now, the whole thing about the Romulans having a non-aggressive pact with Dominion in the first place, I believe that was a story beat that the writers did because they didn't want the Romulans to play an important part on the Dominion War, because they wanted to focus more on the Klingons, Federation, Cardassians, Dominion, because you had an episode in season 5, I can't remember what the hell it's called, the two-parter when the Cardassians joined the Dominion in the first place, and the Romulans showed up, and they were the Romulans, Klingons, Federation all going to fight the Dominion together. So that seemed a given. So it seemed like that threw a monkey wrench in that alliance, that the Romulans like, now peace out, fuck that, we're just gonna have a non-aggression pact, and you guys can just fuck off, which is actually true to the Romulans. But I do think it was kind of a plot device, a writing device. That way they didn't have to focus, because Deep Space Nine has never been about the Romulans, as I said, and so, but they probably didn't want to focus on them more and just wanted to focus on the other races. But again, this episode is about using what they have. So they already had this perfect situation set up. So they could have just continued to just ignore that the Romulans even existed. That way they could go on like with their own Dominion war with the Federation and Klingons and Dominion and Cardassians. Those are the races they want to focus on. The Romulans, they're not Deep Space Nine. We don't want to focus on. They could have done that, but they didn't. They were smart enough to utilize what they had. They had the story of a world power, not world, galaxy, Alpha Quadrant power, a major power, a major player in this field that is being dormant and absent, and when they could have a huge effect on the war. And so they utilized that story and they made it amazing. In fact, the stakes, the fact that this is a bottle episode, mostly dialogue, but the stakes in this episode were probably, I dare say, if not the highest it's ever been in any Star Trek episode. I think up there. I mean, some people would probably argue best of both worlds, but I'll argue right back with this one. But anyway, the stakes are damn high. And because if Sisko fucks up, and he even says this halfway through the episode, if he fucks up, worst comes to worst, the Romulans could join the war with the Dominion on the Dominion side and fight against the Federation. I mean, they're barely keeping it together, just fighting the Dominion and the Cardassians. The Romulans join them as well. Poof, that is it. They're fucked. But if the Romulans join their side, then they could turn the war against the Dominion, despite what Bashir said in that stupid genetically engineering episode where he said it wouldn't make a difference, but apparently it did make a difference because it did win the war, so he's full of shit anyway. His calculations suck. Anyway, sidebar. But, so the stakes were damn high in this episode, and I think that the tension was there throughout. Now, before I get into the heart of this matter, let me talk about the Quark scene as well, because this is one of my favorite Quark scenes, because you know me, I like Quark, he's a good character, but I hate Ferengi episodes, so a lot of times when he's featured a lot, I'm not a huge fan. But I think he's good as a side character when he pops up and stays true to this character. And I love this scene so much because Sisko has to bribe Quark not to press charges against Graith and Tolar. So because Sisko doesn't want a record that he was ever on the station. And I love the way Quark was like, "Are you offering me a bribe?" He was just like so happy, a huge smile on his face, and Sisko's just like, "Oh yeah, get on with it." And it's like Quark's like, "What?" You know, and to be fair, Quark he knew that he had Sisko over the coal, so he could have been a lot worse. He could have had outrageous demands and just kept coming. But the fact that I guess he's probably smart enough to not push Sisko too far. But I mean, if he was, I guess, shall I say, less wise, he might do that. If he was a typical idiotic Ferengi, why don't we blah blah blah, he would push his luck. But I think Quark's smart, and plus I also think that he, even though it's like underneath in subtext, I think he has a friendship with Sisko, and he appreciates Sisko, so he doesn't want to be an asshole to him. He doesn't want to push his luck and ask for way too much. But he asked for just enough. And Sisko was even like, "Was there anything else?" And he's like, "No, I think we can call that a bribe." And I think Quark, of course, was just so impressed with himself that Sisko was bribing him. Like that was probably one of the best days of his life. He was so happy, and he's very sanctimonious, because you get the earlier episodes like the Jim and Darwin. Quark is preaching about how the Federation's all high and mighty, but then and the hearts of hearts is no better than the Ferengi. And by the way, I think that is bullshit, but some people actually sided with Quark, but I think it's within his character to believe that, but I think it's not true. But but because of that, because he always had this attitude that he knew that the humans were just as bad as Ferengi, he just wanted them to show it. So the fact that Sisko actually showed it, he was on Seventh Heaven. He was just living it. And that scene was so great. But it also helped push the story forward. It helped because it's just one thing after another. That's what I loved. And I think an important element to this episode that I don't think I mentioned before is the sunk cost fallacy. And I think that is definitely true, because Sisko even talks about it. It's like he, as if he opened the door and he walked through it when he decided that he was going to bring the Romulans into the war. So Garak was like, all right, the only way we're going to do is by manufacturing evidence, is deceiving them. And Sisko would have been like, nah, he even said, it's like, nah, I should have just said, thank you, Mr. Garak, for your advice. I'll take it under advisement, and just forgot about the whole thing. But he didn't, because he was already committed, and then one thing after another keeps happening. He has to bribe Quark. He has to threaten that Tolar guy who's being a moron. I'll take your time as Garak executes you. Like that was a really awesome scene too. And then he has to lie to Senator Vreenak, and it's just one thing keeps building up after another, and he keeps pressing forward because it's the sunk cost fallacy. It's like he already invested so much. Oh, and the fucking biomimetic gel. That God, that was another great scene. This episode is just fucking amazing. Where because Garak is like the only guy who he can get the authentic Cardassian data rod that would really sell, because these things are so rare and so hard to manipulate. The only way he can get it is by trading it with biomimetic gel, which apparently is a really volatile substance that can be used in genetic weapons or bioweapons. Which is funny, because there's an episode of Voyager where they just casually toss it around like it just happens to be there. That always really annoyed me. And I think it came out after this episode too, so it's like, come on, Voyager. If you're going to reference something, do it right. God damn it. Like, why is it this thing that Bashir was so upset to hand over, they're just tossing it around the ship of Voyager like it's nothing. But anyway, I love that scene where Bashir is like so pissed off, and he goes to Sisko and he's like, I'd like to, I can't do it, blah blah blah. And Sisko's like, oh, I'm not asking you a favor, I'm giving you an order. And he's like, well, I want to see that order in writing. So he's like, I thought you might. Like, that was a great moment. It kind of makes you kind of rethink Sisko's sort of involvement with Bashir in Section 31, because Sisko's actually on Bashir's side, but you can see here Sisko is almost acting a bit like Section 31. He's doing the ends justify the means, but of course Bashir's out of the loop. So I can see why in the episode Inter Armament Assignment Ligas, or whatever the fuck it's called, that's in Season 7, the actually original plan was to have Sisko be the one working with Section 31. I could see that. After watching like this scene, I could see how that would actually feel natural, but ultimately decided to go with Admiral Ross. Because they didn't want Sisko to be this villain that would hurt his big hero image, because he has to be the savior who joins the prophets and saves the world or whatever. But anyway, I mean, I'm not saying I disagree with them. I think they're probably right. It was probably better that they did Ross, but if they did go the other way, I can kind of see it. I can see it with this episode. I think it would sort of fit. All right. Let me get into the nitty-gritty here. So first of all, it's a fake! Like the Altoids. I want to talk about Senator Vreenak. I love this actor. I think he's amazing. I could not disagree more with anyone who says he did a bad job, or was a hammy actor, or that line read. I've seen him. He was in Seinfeld. He played Elaine's boyfriend, who was like a psychologist, and he was like manipulating Kramer or whatever. But I don't know. He's just, at first, when I gotta be honest, when I first saw this episode and I saw the Romulan, and he was such a stereotypical, oh, it's good to be. I look forward to seeing your station while it's still here. That is, like, he was such a the cliche asshole type. But I think like, the more, I've gone to appreciate that episode, the more I actually think that works. I like the fact that he's such an asshole, such a cliche asshole. Because that does show how hard it is, like, for Sisko to do his job, and how rigid, like, he was. And I just think the actor does such a damn good job. Now, let's talk about these Altoids aren't fake, by the way. I got some Altoids in there. But let's talk about that line, it's a fake. Now, I would say they're about 5. If I ever did a video, and I'm thinking about doing a video about this, of my top 5 most shocking, most powerfully shocking moments in all of TV and television history, moments that I think, even more than movies, that completely blew me away. Not just because it was shocking, but because it was so powerful, and it was like. Because I think too much like shows and movies will try to be shocking for the sake of being shocking. They just want to pull the wool over your eyes, and sometimes they really shouldn't have. But these moments to me were not like just shocking for shocking's sake. Is that they were so powerful, like they meant so much, and you had no idea the show would go there, and it just makes it like a billion times better that they actually fucking went there. And so up there for me would be like in Game of Thrones would be, of course, Ned Stark losing his head, or the Red Wedding, and Lost would be when Michael killed Anna Lucia and Libby, or with the whole "we got to go back," and and Dexter, it's when his wife was killed. And I would actually put this moment that it's a fake right up there. Right up there with it as the best shocking moments, like in all, not just TV, films, anything. Like the moment where it just really shook me to the core and made me rethink what the whole show meant. And by the way, if you're going to complain about me spoiling any of those shows, you've had your chance. These shows have all been out for a really long time. Don't blame me. And by the way, Bruce Willis and The Sixth Sense was dead the whole time. And Citizen Kane, Rosebud is a sled. It's not my fault if you're not caught up in this shit. But anyway. Anyway. Sorry, getting off track there. It's a fake! So I just love that moment so much, because this really, it changed everything to me. Because a typical Star Trek, I so expected it to be like typical Star Trek. Typical Star Trek is that the data rod would pass and everything would be fine and everything's good. So the fact that, because Cisco even said that worst comes to worst, Romulans could join the war against them, and then they'd really be fucked. You kind of knew that wouldn't happen, but when Senator Vreenak held up that fucking rod and said it's a fake, all bets were off. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe the Romulans would join the war against the Dominion. Maybe the Federation would all be wiped out by the Dominion. That's how Deep Space Nine would end. Like, I wasn't putting anything past them, because that is a fake was totally blew my mind. That was totally unexpected. That was totally un-Star Trek-like. That was totally unlike anything that they've ever done before. And it was amazing. I would say this is the single best moment of the entire franchise now. It's become a meme since then. People talked about this. There's a bonus features from the documentary where a fan was talking about how, the original series has Khan and Next Generation has The Line Must Be Drawn Here, which I would argue is more of the movies. But anyway, Deep Space Nine it's a fake. Now, I've heard it from many sources that they thought that this was cheesy, over the top, and bad acting, and that's why it's so, commonly mimicked and memed and everything. But I could not possibly disagree with that more. I think the reason why it's so memed and mimicked is more of like the Khan and the line must be drawn here. Those lines are not bad acting. Those, especially the line must be drawn here. Patrick Stewart is amazing. Those lines are not bad acting. They're powerful, and that's why they stick in the mind, and they're memorable, and they're iconic, and that's why they're memed. And I say it's the same thing with It's a Fake. I don't think it's bad acting at all, to be perfectly honest. In fact, when I just rewatched this episode, I was expecting it to be more over the top. I was expecting them to go, "It's a fake!" But no, he was just like, "It's a fake." It was a lot more subtle than I remember. Especially because I've watched a bunch of reviews recently where people were really building it up and saying that he's overacting and he's ham acting, is horrible acting. And so that's what I was expecting. And I watched it, and it's actually quite down low. In fact, let me put it to you this way. So, Senator Vreenak is a Federation-hating guy. He's all about having his alliance with Dominion. He's brought on board Deep Space Nine, and Cisco, a member of the Federation that he hates, tells him that the Dominion, who he loves, is planning to attack Romulus, to betray him, which would be a huge stab in the heart and make him re-question his whole life worldview, if it were true. But of course he's doubtful because he hates the Federation. So then he's given this rod, telling it's genuine. He finds out that it's fabricated, and so that these people that he hates are trying to trick him, trying to deceive him. So they're showing themselves to be the deceptive assholes that he thought they were. So of course he's going to be fucking outraged beyond belief. I mean, Cisco is trying to trick him to sending his whole people into a war where millions of Romulans would die. Cisco is trying to deceive him into killing massive amounts of Romulans that don't have to die otherwise. So he's going to be outraged beyond fucking belief. How do you expect him to react? Do you expect him to go, well, actually, Cisco, I examined your data rod and I found out it's actually fabricated. So you're trying to deceive me and I'm not going to let you get away with it. Meh. I mean, is that how you think that's not how I think he should react. I think he should go, it's a fake! In fact, if anything, I think he should have upplayed it. He was being too subtle. Sorry. I'm sorry, but I goddamn disagree with people who say that's bad acting. You do not know what good acting is if you think that's bad acting. Anyway, speaking of bad acting, I don't know. Let me put that off a bit later. Let's stay on Vreenak for a bit, because there's a moment earlier that I love. Actually, I didn't notice this myself, not until I watched a review recently and someone pointed this out. And it's so brilliant when he's sitting with Cisco and he's drinking, the replicated Romulan drink or whatever, and he's talking like, this is really good replica. I can taste and almost think that it's not the real thing. Almost. And I always thought that was casual conversation. I didn't realize that was actually strong foreshadowing of how, the data rod information was almost perfect. Almost. But he just couldn't forget, he could tell that there was something off about it, and that actually ended up being the foreshadowing what would happen with the data rod. This episode is just brilliant. It's just so brilliant every way around. So now let me talk about the downside. And those familiar with my channel probably know what I'm going to get at here. But it's one slight little... It's not a huge thing for me, obviously, because I love this episode beyond belief. But I do think Avery Brooks acting, I would say it's off and on. I wouldn't say it's consistently bad, because there are some times where he nails in this episode, which is why I understand why some people will be resistant to me when I complain. In fact, one person told me once that I was dead to them because I was complaining about Avery Brooks' acting. More specifically, his personal logs. I don't know, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. The souffle will either rise or it won't. That was cool. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I remember the starting scene where he's talking about, I got a star date 564 whatever, and he just keeps fucking up. And he's like, okay, I gotta sit it down. I have to recount my events. There's something about that dialogue in the way it was delivered that seems disingenuous to me. I don't know if it's just me, but... And here's something I've sort of complained about Avery Brooks' acting throughout the entire show, because some people think that he's an amazing actor, where I think he's more of a theatrical actor, I'll put it that way. And having studied the difference between film acting and theater acting, that's something that kind of sticks in my crow when I see theater acting on screen, where it doesn't really belong on screen, it belongs on stage. But with Avery Brooks, oftentimes he'll deliver his line with a cadence that seems unnatural. It seems it's the type of cadence someone would use when they're reading lines, when they're reciting something. Oh, I'm not going to hear today. You know, it's an acting thing, and I don't claim to be an expert on acting, but I do know a little something, and I do know that I can recognize that even when I was a kid, I'd recognize that the cadence that felt like he was reciting lines or reading lines rather than speaking naturally. And I honestly think he does that at the start of this episode, that opening scene with his personal log. And also, I'm just not a fan of people who stare into the camera and fiction shows like that, because, I don't know, being my little amateur director and directing films, it was always a big, huge no-no to look directly in the camera. That's the one thing you don't do. And I suppose, like, if you're doing this reciting the personal log or being the narrator, that's supposed to be the exception. If you're the narrator, you're allowed to look into the camera. Yeah, I thought that could have been handled better. And, of course, like, I remember I talked about this in several other videos I did. When this episode first came out, I read this review from this website I used to read all the time. It did DS9 reviews and Voyager reviews of every episode. And he said, like, this episode was amazing despite Avery Brooks' every attempt to torpedo it with his overacting. And that's, like, I think, like, his overacting kind of, I was aware of it on a subconscious level, but it wasn't until I read this review that I was like, oh yeah, now that you mention it. And ever since I read that review, I can't help but see it every time I watched it, particularly focus almost entirely on his personal log reading, which I do. Even though I say there are some times it works, I would say that overall that is the weak part of this episode. And sometimes he does, I'm sorry, he does ham it up a bit with, people are dying every day, worlds are struggling for their freedom, and here I am wrestling with the finer points of morality. No! I have to keep my eye on the ball, winning the war! That is what... I'm just like... See, that I don't buy. It's a Ferg I totally buy, because you need that passion, that lust. You've been deceived. The whole, I gotta keep my eye on the ball, winning the war! I'm just like... Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. I think that is, I don't know, that whole personal log, like, I'm typically not a fan of the whole narration structure. And I actually think perhaps the episode would have been better if they just torpedoed that storytelling device entirely. But sometimes it works. Like the thing about the souffle will either rise or it won't. Like, that was a good way to really raise the tension right before the big it's a fake reveal. And the ending, of course, is just classic. The ending is perfect, I will say. So maybe it's worth having those personal logs, which is ultimately why I forgive them, for that ending. Because that ending is amazing, where he's like, I can live with it. I can live with it. Like, that acting, I think, is great, by the way. I think, as I said, off and on, that's on. Totally buy that. That is amazing in the way he's just like, computer, erase that whole log. Like, that was beautiful. And then it just fades to black. Like, that was just such a gut punch of an ending that just made this thing so powerful. And that's what I love about this episode, because the whole time he's talking about how he went wrong, everything's fucked, I can't believe this happened, I can't believe I did this. And so that's why you think that everything's wrong. So when the big, if it's a fake reveal comes, you do think the Federation's fucked. You do think the Romulans are going to join the Dominion, because that's how he's been talking the whole time. But then you get the reveal is actually, no, it's because Garak deceived him, tricked him into being an accessory to murder, and deceiving an entire people in order to get them to join a war they don't. That's why he hates himself. Even though ultimately he accomplished his goal. He got the Romulans to join the war, and that means the Federation is probably going to win, and less of his friends and fellow Federation citizens are going to die because of his actions. But he had to go into such a shady place to get there that he still hated himself for it, and it cost his self-respect. And so that was just the perfect way to end the episode, just be like, erase the whole log. Amazing. And I gotta talk a bit about Garak here before I go, because as I said, like, Garak has always been, this is so in line with his character, and that's the beauty of this episode. It's not like he has to go out of character, or a big revelation or change has to happen. No, this is just something that Garak suggested because Sisko came to him. And Sisko came to him because he was so desperate. Now, here's an interesting thought, because at the end of the episode, Garak tells Sisko, that's why you came to me, isn't it? Because you knew I was capable of doing the things that you weren't. Now, I don't know. I'm debating on my head whether or not that's actually true, because my natural instinct to say that that's not necessarily true, because the reason Sisko came to him is because he's a Cardassian and he wants to help manipulate the Dominion. Cardassian is part of the Dominion. That seems a bit more logical to me, but I suppose there's always that possibility. There's a subconscious part of Sisko that knew that what was required here was something that he was not willing to do himself, that he would need someone shady like Garak. I don't know if I'm completely convinced about that, so I don't know if what Garak's saying is true or not, but it could be. And I think it's definitely a fascinating line. Definitely, again, 1000% in Garak's character for him. Just kind of like the same way that Quark had such smug satisfaction when Sisko bribed him. Again, this episode has so many beautiful parallels. It's so beautiful. But it's kind of the same thing with Garak, because he has that same satisfaction that Sisko ultimately lets him do this, lets him do all the shady shit to and I think honestly that Garak feels alive again himself, because he's able to manipulate, as I said, the balance of power of the entire fucking galaxy, or at least the Alpha Quadrant, but basically for our purposes the galaxy, the known galaxy anyway. He's able to manipulate the entire fucking balance of power that will change the entire known galaxy, and he's able to do this by manipulating Sisko, and I think he takes really strong satisfaction out of the fact that Sisko ultimately wants him to do it. And god damn, like that scene when Sisko punches Garak, oh fucking hell, that scene, so good. It gives me goosebumps. Again, talking about Avery Brooks acting, perfect acting in this scene. Not over the top a bit, the way he's yelling at it, and then he'll discover it is a fraud. Love it. Not over the top. Perfect acting, perfect scene. Beautiful. Anyway, I think I've spent enough time gushing about this episode. It's loved by fans and everyone alike, and for good goddamn reason. So my rating for In the Pale Moonlight out of 10, well, I wonder what it could be. It's a 10! The best. It is the best. It is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. Whether I rated number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's splitting hairs. It doesn't matter. It is the best. It is up there. It is the gold nugget of what this franchise has to offer, and that is what you can take home. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait for all the nasty comments complaining about me being wrong about Avery Brooks acting. Bring it on. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Be sure to check out my my channel for more Star Trek videos, and more videos and other shows like The Expanse and Lost and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.